Hello, guys. I think today we will have one of the most important conversations on our channel because it is going to be about our Ukrainian history. Those of you who follow the events of Russian war against Ukraine might have already noticed that it is not just about the territories, it is also about the Ukrainian history and Ukrainian cultural heritage. And I'm very happy and honored to invite a famous Ukrainian historian and political analyst, the author of one of your favorite books and actually many more books on Ukrainian history, Oleksandr Palii. Happy to see you on the channel.
Hi, Anna.
I was actually very surprised at how many very interesting questions we have received after I've shared with the community that we can talk to you about the history of Ukraine. And there are lots and lots of questions that you guys shared. Thank you so much. And I think we might need a couple of conversations with Dr. Palii to answer all of this. But let's start with those that received most of your support. So question number one. What do Ukrainians consider to be three most important milestones in our history?
Thank you for very clever questions. The most important milestone in Ukrainian history is the understanding that the medieval Kievan state, Kyiv Rus, was exclusively a Ukrainian state. What does this mean? From 9th to 15th centuries, only the territory of Ukraine was called Rus. The rest of the lands were simply dependent on Kiev. At that time, the name Rusins or Ruthenians was applied exclusively to the inhabitants of Ukraine. Ruthenians lived on the territory of Ukraine, but not on the territory of present-day Russia. And this has plenty confirmation in all Ukrainian and all chronicles, medieval. The second milestone is the understanding that Europe is our home. Moreover, there is a sufficiently probable version that the ancestors of all so-called Indo-European peoples came from the territory of Ukraine a long time ago, some 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. Finally, an understanding of how great the distance is between us and Russians. Ukrainians are Slavs, but Russians are primarily Slavicized, descendants of Finno-Ugric people. Ukrainians love freedom, Russians hate it. Ukrainians are individualists, Russians love collectivism. To my opinion, this is due to the fact that in the territory of Central Russia, the Russian people originated. The Stone Age lasted 3,000 to 4,000 years longer. In general, the ancestors of Russians are not so long ago from the Stone Age. And this is a scientific fact that you can read about in this book and in each book you could collect on Ukrainian history. You can buy this book on Amazon.
Yeah, I will leave a link to the book so that you can check the book, read the book, and know more. And I definitely agree that Russians come from the Stone Age. Perhaps they are still in the Stone Age right now.
Yes, and it is scientific, purely scientific facts. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, at first millennium before Christ, the tribe of Androphagi, or cannibals, live in that is now Central Russia. So I quote him. They neither observe justice nor are governed by any laws. They are nomads and their dress is Scythian, but the language which they speak is peculiar to themselves. Non-Indo-European. Unlike any other nations in these parts, they are cannibals. cannibals. And the Roman historian Pliny the Elder, 1st century after Domini, wrote that Androphagy lived 10 days journey, 400, 700 kilometers beyond the Dnipro. So on the central Russia.
Mm-hmm.
The Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus, 4th century AD, mentioned that cannibals were nomads and that other peoples did not want to live next to them due to their cannibalism. So in the late 19th century, the Czech slavist Wilhelm Tomaszek proposed that word martva, тобто man-eater. Alice means a British archaeologist whose studies focused on Eastern Europe, placed the Androphagy in central Muscovy. The Androphagy were probably the most barbarous of Finno-Ugric tribes, as no trade route passed through their land. It is his quote. Until the middle of the 1st millennium AD, the tribes in central Russia used primarily bone and flint tools. So 3,000 to 4,000 years from Stone Age of Europe, longer. Russian Stone Age is longer. Metals were very rare and primarily imported. So it is main thing for a description of differences between Ukrainian and Russian people, because it is Stone Age has very big impact on moral, on different futures of different peoples.
Yeah, we clearly see that they are still in Stone Age and a bit of cannibals now. And then maybe a more optimistic question, how do you see Ukrainian cultural identity developing after the war and in total freedom from Russia?
To my mind, it is now time to make other nations understand Ukraine. Every people brings something to the common heritage of humanity. Now we need our contribution to be expressively and very vividly communicated. We Ukrainians want freedom. To be honest, this is what most of the peoples of Eastern Europe want. What should we do to make the world hear us? For example, I wrote the script for a historical film about the ancient history of Ukraine. I reread the script recently and loved it again. I dream that it will be shot in high quality. But unfortunately, I have no acquaintances in Hollywood.
Maybe we will find some. But indeed, you are right. We are one of the greatest discoveries of the 21st century, Ukraine, and how different it is from Russia. And here is one of my favorite questions that comes next. Which part of Ukrainian history, in your opinion, your experience, is most misinterpreted by historians from other countries?
Now, interesting opinion is spreading among different European historians. They ask if Russia lies so much with many testimonies, videos, etc. Then how much has Russia lied about its ancient history? This is a very valid question, because Russian history is actually Russian top secret. But of course, it is easy to lie with no or very little reliable evidence that is about ancient history. At the same time, many historians manage to silence obvious facts or distort their meaning. This is also happens with modern history, because in modern history there is a lot of politics.
Yeah. But one of the things that I keep repeating on the channel, that by stealing history, you cannot steal the qualities that people need to possess to build this history. So no matter how they rewrite books, Ukrainians keep standing for freedom and defeating them. And the next question demands some advanced knowledge because it's about Treaty of Pereyaslav, which was actually signed between Bogdan Khmelnytsky and the representatives of the Muscovy. And some actually treat it as the greatest mistake in the Ukrainian history, because since then, slow expansion of Russia begins. So there was a question from our Polish subscriber, in the light of the past 300 years, Ukraine, how can we judge this Treaty of Pereyaslav?
Thank you. Most Ukrainians think that Ukrainian hetman Bogdan Khmelnytsky in 17th century made a terrible miscalculation by concluding an agreement with Moscow. Khmelnytsky, by the way, thought so himself, and already 3 years later concluded an alliance with Sweden, which was then fighting against Moscow. But it was very bad miscalculation from rather clever people. Bogdan Khmelnytsky was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually we have a lot of viewers from Sweden, and sending greetings to them. We share a lot of our history. And the next question is about the Russian folklore. And I like how different questions are. And it was, does Russian folklore actually come from Ukraine?
No, Russian folklore, of course, is originated from Russia, but there is some fact. In the 19th century, on the territory of Russia, were recorded so-called Bylin's tales about Ilya Muromets, a mercenary in the service of Prince of Kyiv. His name was Muromets, probably because he came from the Finno-Ugric Muroma tribe. Russians are originated from Finno-Ugric tribes Meria, Mishora, Muroma, etc., etc. But the Prince of Kyiv, Volodymyr the Great, had many such mercenaries of various nations, of Normans, Scandinavians, so.
And the next question received a lot of support, and I think it's very important in the terms of propaganda and in misinterpretations that Russia does when talking about the Second World War, Nazis and Ukraine and so on. So could you discuss the Ukrainian contribution to the defeat of the Nazis in the Second World War? Because this definitely demonstrates the bravery of Ukrainian people, and many underestimate that. Even Germany and Scholz, who still feel like they are obliged to Russia, when in reality, lots of heroes of the Second World War were Ukrainians.
About 7 million Ukrainians fought in the Soviet armed forces. Some 3 million were killed, and a significant portion became disabled. Meanwhile, victories in the war were sometimes won by a handful of regiments. This suggests that the Soviet victory in the Second World War would have been impossible without Ukrainians. During the war, 2,000 Ukrainians were awarded the title of the Hero of the Soviet Union, highest title. And one of them was my brother of my grandfather, Fedor Palii. He was a pilot, fought in Crimea, in Donbass. In Crimea, his plane was attacked. It caught fire, and the cockpit did not open, and only his friend from the neighboring district smashed the cockpit with the hammer, and that is how my relative Fedor Palii was saved.
Amazing.
Yes. Ukraine lost 7 to 8 million people of its population in the war. Ukraine found itself in the center of the war and suffered more damage than Russia, even Germany, France, Poland, and so on. Despite, it is very important, despite the Ukrainian contribution to the defeat of Nazis, the Soviet authorities planned to deport all Ukrainians from Ukraine. It is known that Stalin probed this possible reaction of the US to such a deportation. And Soviet Secretary General Nikita Khrushchev publicly admitted that Ukrainians have escaped this fate because there are too many of them and there was no place to which they could be deported. Otherwise, Stalin would have deported them.
That's awful, because when you think about the First World War, the Second World War, Ukrainian territories were the main theaters of war, the battlefields, and so many lost lives. And this is definitely underestimated by the global history and understanding. And you've mentioned Donbass and Crimea, always very important for the Ukrainian victory territories. And the next question speaks about the peninsula, Crimea, and how tribal is Ukraine, and particularly Crimea.
Thank you for the question. Crimea is the only territory of Ukraine where ethnic Ukrainians did not constitute a majority before the war. In Crimea, Ukrainians made up about a quarter of the population, plus 10% of Tatars. It must be said that such a situation arose after Stalin deported all Tatars from the Crimea in 1944. After that, many Russians invaded those lands. If we talk about history, Russia controlled Crimea from 1783 to 1854. However, even in ancient times, Kyiv controlled the Crimea for about 2 centuries, even longer than Russia. The Tmutarakan Principality, those rulers were appointed by the Prince of Kyiv, was located in Crimea from 10th to 12th century, or 2 centuries.
Crimea is Ukraine, and the moment when Crimea returns back to Ukraine, we defeat Russia. It's super important for the victory. And guys, I remind you once again, this book is amazing. It is very interesting. It is brief. And if you want to check, we will leave the link so you can find and you can get it. And I have a lot of friends, viewers from Scandinavian countries. And honestly, they don't need much explanation. They support us. They share common history. And the next question actually returns us to it. About Scandinavia and Ukraine, we have a long common history that started in the Viking Age. And there were lots of Viking settlements along Dnipro River, and we have lots of common historical figures. And the question is about this early history of Kyiv Rus. And did the Norsemen really build Kyiv? What sources do you use to analyze that period? And a funny question, why do many Ukrainians look Scandinavian? I don't think we do look Scandinavian, but what are your thoughts on this period of our history?
Some similarities we see. Why Ukrainians are similar to Scandinavian peoples? I think, as a historian, it is because in the third millennium before BC, people came to Sweden and big part of the rest of Europe from the territory of Ukraine. Now these people are called Indo-Europeans, but no one knows what they called themselves in that ancient times. In general, the closest relatives of the Slavs are the Baltics and Germanic people. Baltics are Lithuanians and Latvians, and Germanic peoples include the Scandinavians. But the English also is a language that belongs to the Germanic group of languages. According to the Rus primarily chronicle, an ancient Ukrainian chronicle, we know that about some Vikings or Varyaks in Ukraine.
Bulgarians sometimes known as, yes. And the next question is quite optimistic. It is about the historical precedents regarding conflict with Russia, war with Russia, that gives us hope in the relation of current war.
Russia disintegrated quite easily twice during the 20th century. In 1917, the Russian writer Rozanov wrote that Russia was drained in 3 days. In 1991, Russia did it for the same amount of time, 3 days. Actually, Ukraine helped to collapse the USSR in 1991. The Baltic countries and Georgia started that process, and we finished it. In addition, there were many victories of Ukraine over Russia in our history. Year 1173, the defeat at Vyshgorod. 1216 at Lipitsa, at the beginning of 17th century, successful campaigns on Moscow and Smolensk, the battle in Konotop on 1659, and so on. In general, the myth of Russia's invincibility is just a myth, Russian propaganda. For example, in the 16th and 17th centuries, there was little more common than the massacre of Russians by Poles. This happened regularly once every 10 to 15 years. And then new elected American President Donald Trump recently said that Russia defeated Napoleon. I think that the British and Germans, they are offended because, you know, these names, Admiral Nelson, Blücher, Trafalgar Square, and so on. There were no any Russian in the Battle of Waterloo. And of the about 10 battles with the French at the beginning of the 19th century, the Russians lost almost all of them. The same story with Hitler. without American Lend-Lease and without 7 million Ukrainians in the Red Army, I think German tanks would have reached the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, thank you so much. These are actually very vivid illustrations that Russia can be defeated and Russia will be defeated. All the myths that they spread are based either on fake history or on fake images, propaganda, but in reality, Russia will be defeated. It is an old kind of empire. Empires do not survive in the 21st century. And maybe the last question for today, the 10th question, which is about the languages. I often get these questions, and the person who asks the question actually knows that Kyiv was founded hundreds of years before Moscow, actually like 665 or something. What a happy period it was. No Moscow on the planet. But it seems that like Russians and Ukrainian come from what can be called like Slavic heritage, and giving common long ago association. How did languages split into Russian and Ukrainian? And also a beautiful question, what other languages are spoken in Russia? And do those people who live in Russia consider themselves Russian, or they are reluctant provinces of Russia and they would rather self-govern and speak their own languages? I am personally a great supporter of the collapse of the Russian Federation and new countries appearing. What is your opinion on all of these questions?
Since ancient times, Rus, not Russia, Rus, was the name applied only to Ukraine, the Kyiv, Chernihiv, Pereyaslav principalities. And their princes believed that Rus was their homeland. The other dependent territory included present-day Russia. They are thought of as being subjected to Rus. In the time of Kyiv Rus, the population of Ukraine was called Rusini. And this name largely persisted in central Ukraine until the 11th century, in Galiciina and Bukovina, Western Ukraine, until the 20th century, and in some places in the Zakarpattia region in Ukraine until these days. So the outskirts of the Kievan state, there the Russian and Belarusian peoples later arose. They are not called Rus, neither then they were under Kyiv's rules until the 12th century, nor several centuries later. In Muscovy itself, the term Russia began to be used in reference to the country by the authorities as late as in 15th, 18th century. Then the idea of seizing Ukrainian lands began to circulate there. So word Russia is taken not from Russian language, but from Greek language. It is only stealing of brand. So Muscovy was finally renamed as Russia by the Tsar Ukazes in 1721. So as for Ukraine, it is not exact about the theme of the topic, but it is very important. Ukraine first appeared in Chronicle in 1187. Ukraine in Ukrainian language means country. Ukraine, Країна, Україна. Країна means country in Ukrainian. And this name happened even before the Mongol invasion, which totally undermines Russian imperial storyline about a cradle of Ukraine with the Russian people. So about languages. The Ukrainian language was for the first time recorded in collection of laws and especially in household inscriptions and the charters of princes in 10th, 11th, 12th centuries. Most Ukrainian scholars believe that the Ukrainian language, with its special features, was formed on the basis of ancient Slavic dialects under some influence from the Scythian and Sarmatian languages at the time of, in the middle of the first millennium AD, in the time of the so-called Antean tribal union in Ukraine. There were no Slavs, no any Slav in the territory of either modern Russia or modern Belarus in that time. In contrast to this, I want to add that name of the capital of Ukraine itself always had the Ukrainian spelling, Kyiv, in chronicles. So all names of princes are typically Ukrainian. Volodymyr, Volodymyrko, Ivanko, Vasilko, и так далее, and so on. In contrast, the Russian language was formed in the 12th to 14th, 15th century as the local largely Finno-Ugric population learned Church Slavonic or Bulgarian language, which was imposed by the church and the authorities. And present most rivers of central Russia and many Russian cities in central Russia, including Moscow, have Finno-Ugric names. In imperial times, Ukrainian was viewed by Russian authorities as the Polonized version of Russian. This proposition is utterly unscientific because Ukrainian features were found in the language of Kyiv Rus long before any Polish influence. Importantly, standard Ukrainian is based on the vernacular spoken in the Poltava and Chernigiv regions. These territories, they are part of Poland only less than 100 years in 1569 by 1684. And this short period of time, many people did not have to deal with the Polish authorities, to say nothing of changing the language of their ancestors. Today's Russians actually appeared as a result of assimilation of primarily Finno-Ugric peoples, Meria, Meshchora, Muroma, Ves, Chud, and so on. This assimilation till now, this Finno-Ugric people, some of them are existed even now. Putin, for example, comes from the West people. They lost their language and identity and became Muscovites, and then Russians after 18th century. Many Russians would like Russia to collapse, but they will talk about it after the collapse. They are very inert and intimidated to do something about it. And most of present-day peoples of Russia are drained out. So they are destroyed, these peoples. Only some of them have some strength now. For example, Caucasian peoples, and almost all other peoples are destroyed. And our duty is to free them from this Russian slavery.
Thank you so much. That is actually a very optimistic plan for the future. And many people agree that the victory of Ukraine is good for the freedom of Russia in future, and many new countries appearing that will be able to practice their own languages, their own cultures, and the world will become a better place. Thank you so much for this conversation. We still have a lot of questions left, and I'm sure many will appear in the comments. Dr. Palii also has his YouTube channel where he speaks in Ukrainian and Russian, and we need to teach Russians correct history. I will leave a link to his channel so that you can check, subscribe, and watch if you know the languages. And thank you so much for joining our conversation.
Thank you.
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!